Good day to you. It wasn't too awful long ago that I was in Ghana, Africa, about 8 years ago. And while I was there, I picked up this drum. It's actually got goat skin on the top of it. Everything is handmade. See the color in this red right here? That's coming from some kind of berry. They're not going to Walmart and buying a red dye and then dyeing this material. That's coming from some kind of red berry that's growing somewhere in Ghana, Africa. And even though this drum is made for tourists like me going through the market where I bought it, that drum has an incredible history in Ghana. I'm sure of it. I know that a long time ago, before written languages were invented, and actually in Ghana, Africa, you still have many tribes of people who are not speaking, who are not using written language because there is no written language for their language. There's only an oral language. But at any rate, in old Ghana, before there was even written language available in the form of an alphabet, people were using drums like that one to communicate between villages, to let the village know that's just over the mountain or on the other side of the crop of trees that you've just harvested an antelope and that there's enough to share. Yeah, drums were used for that. It's part of the Ghanaian culture. Yeah, the Ghanaian culture, even today, still has drums that are embedded in the history of the people. And that's my introduction for today because we're talking about cultural characteristics as a guiding force for how media systems are shaped. Cultural characteristics is really the first element of a media system that we're taking on. Our last chapter that we took a look at, globalization, I say chapter, but it's really the material from my book that's in chapter form, but I'm just giving you a piece of the chapter. The last chapter we read was on globalization. That was just setting the worldwide climate. Now we're going into elements of a media system, and you're going to start to drill into your own country today with this element of cultural characteristics. And when we talk about that term cultural characteristics, obviously culture is at the root of it, right? And culture is one of these densely packed terms. It has a lot of meanings to it depending on what you want to think about it. Some people think of culture as pop culture. It could be Ariana Grande. That's culture. Some people think of culture as Broadway, going into New York City and seeing a Broadway play. Some people think of culture as really high culture, like symphony or opera. And some people think of culture the way that I think of culture and the way that I use it in this book and the way that Gerd, the Dutch researcher who I mentioned in this passage, thinks about culture is our everyday rituals that separate one group of people from another group of people. It makes that group of people seem different. And so we can even use culture as a way of describing how everyday rituals separate one group of people from another group of people. We can use culture at a really micro level. Like we can say that people in the South, they're from a different culture, right? We talk about that frequently. We talk about how there's a Southern hospitality in the South. We talk about how in the North people are more in a rush. That's just within our own nation. We have two different cultures operating by their rituals, right? By the way that they lead their lives. And that's a similar situation for culture across the world, where we can look at it as a more macro term, where we can look at the difference between Canadian culture and US culture, between British culture and French culture. But of course, what we're trying to do is focus our study of culture today on how it relates to a media system. So when you start to investigate your country today, you'll see that you'll get to the end of the reading, and there are three ways to break down culture, and these three ways should be the way that you look at your country to try and determine the effect of your country's culture on its media system. The first thing you can take a look at is government, the way that a government is set up in a country. You have a government in China that's a communist government, as a for example. It's the only party, the only legitimate political party in the country. That's the way that communism works. There is no alternate political party that's a legitimate party. So that's interesting to study that government and then how it gets all played out in terms of agencies and power of the presidency and all that. You can look at your own country. You can see, is it a democracy? Is it a military dictatorship? Is it something in between? Is it a former communist country? Is it a current socialist country? Is it a capitalist country, in terms of the way that the government is set up? Because then the government starts to perceive that it has a role with regard to media. It needs to, well, you could say control media or monitor media or supervise media or regulate media in certain ways according to the way that the government is set up. So you can take a look at the government of your country today when you're looking at cultural characteristics. Secondly, You can take a look at the society that's in your country. The society, it's a loose term. It's difficult to describe it. It talks about how the group of people or groups of people that live in a country have differences between them based on their social class, for their occupation, based on how much they earn, based on their level of education. It also looks how society is grouped together. Do you have poor people living in cities, for example? Do you have rich people living in cities? Do you have people who are living in the countryside who don't have access to broadcast television? I mean, I'm kind of saying some things that are random now. I'm not expecting you to follow my train of thinking here, except insofar as to say that you're looking at society. What is it about the society of your country? You can talk about the population, how many people live there. You can talk about language differences that are in your country. If you have more than one language that is spoken, you can talk about a certain segment of the population that seems to be there's more occupying more of the population than other parts, like females 54 and older, maybe a big part of it. Whatever it is you want to look at, it's all hovering around that subterm of culture that we're talking about as society. So you've got government, you've got society, and then the last thing that you can take a look at when you're taking that culture for your country, the last thing that you can take a look at is geography of the country. The geography of the country, where it's situated, what countries surround the country, and if those countries are hostile or friendly, if they are speaking a similar language or a different language. Does that geography of the country place it within range of many radio signals from other countries, and therefore it's going to be having media content from other countries naturally flowing over its borders all the time? Or is that country very, very isolated, and it's very difficult to get foreign media flowing into that country, or even to push your own media into other countries because the opportunities are few and far between. There's no countries around you. So these are things that you can take a look at that have to do with the geography of your country. So as you drill down today, my sense is the most important thing, the most fascinating thing that you'll be looking at will be society when you're looking at culture. But I think government and also geography play a role as well. And if you keep your attention to what are the daily practices of people, how do people practice rituals? What symbols do they use? In the United States, we have all kinds of symbols. On the 4th of July, you're going to see a flag, you're going to see stars, you're going to see fireworks, you're going to be eating hamburgers and hot dogs. You're going to, at some point, hear a patriotic message from some public official on television. If you watch, these are rituals that go on in the United States on the 4th of July. You will find similar things that you can bring into your discussion to inform your post for today, your country media post when you're looking at cultural characteristics. So have fun with it and have a great day.